sound. I understand they scared you in traffic meeting. That's true. Scared you in traffic. EW was saying it got a little scary at times. So I said, what, fighting the car? He said, no, not fighting the car. Before I said, we're past that. Bump trips past that.
He used to Bonnie's drive.
Okay, that's why it was scary. It's good to have you guys back safe and sound. If you want to become famous for changing history, you need to become like a great military leader. Everybody talks about your exploits in battle, or maybe you become a great American president, revolutionary president, do something great and transform a country, or you can invent something that is revolutionary, like the internet, or the computer, or those already invented. So you have to do something else, you have to invent something else. But if you want to become infamous for changing history, build a friendship with a very influential person, and then stab him in the back to betray him. You think about Julius Caesar, Marcus Brutus, George Washington, Benedict Arnold. You think about Jesus Christ and Judas Iscariot. Now, there is no hurt like the betrayal of a friend. Someone you loved and completely trusted, someone that you really relied upon, and that person stabs you in the back. It's painful. I personally felt that pain. I would say pretty much everyone in here at some point has gone through that. Where somebody close hurt you, stabbed you in the back, someone you thought was a trusted friend. It's one thing to be deceived by an enemy. It's one thing to be deceived by somebody that you know is an enemy. It's another thing to be disappointed by a friend. You can handle rejection by someone who hates you, but to be betrayed by someone that you thought loved you, that is totally different. It's a deep pain, and that can destroy your self-esteem, your ability to trust other people, your willingness to allow yourself to engage in any close relationship. In fact, it can be absolutely devastating to your relationship. It can absolutely tear your heart out. We've been in a series in the Psalms called Playlists. Now, we talked about a playlist was an electronic or digital grouping of songs where you kind of pick a theme and you can choose those digital songs from different things. But if you look into songs, they're really a playlist. You can pick up almost any theme and find a song that pretty much addresses that, any situation, any human emotion you can imagine. So today we're going to complete that series, and it's written. This is a psalm again written by David, who was a great king. It's Psalm 55, and I've got it in your outline. I'm not going to ask you to stand this morning; it's long, and I don't want to make you stand too long. I know some of you have knee problems, so we don't want to make you stand too long. But we're going to read Psalm 55. Now we're going to hit some of the highlight verses in here, but I want to read the whole passage. David says here, God, listen to my prayer. Do not hide from my plea for help. Pay attention and answer me. I am restless and in turmoil with my complaint because of my enemies' words, because of the pressure of the wicked, for they bring down disaster on me and harass me in anger. My heart shudders within me. Terrors of death sweep over me. Fear and trembling grip me. Horror has overwhelmed me. I said, if only I had wings like a dove, I'd fly away and find rest. How far away I would flee. I would stay in the wilderness. Selah. I would hurry to my shelter from the raging wind and storm. Lord, confuse and confound their speech. For I see violence and strife in the city. Day and night they make rounds on its walls. Crime and trouble are within it. Destruction is inside it. Oppression and deceit never leave its marketplace. Now it is not an enemy who insults me. Otherwise I could bear it. It is not a foe who rises up against me. Otherwise I could hide from it. But it is you, a man who's my peer, my companion, and good friend. We used to have close fellowship. We walked with the crowd into the house of God. Let death take them by surprise. Let them go down to Sheol alive. That's the grave alive. Because evil is in their homes and within them. But I call to God, and the Lord will save me. I complain and groan morning, noon, and night, and he hears my voice. Though many are against me, he will redeem me from my battle unharmed. God, the one enthroned from long ago, will hear and humiliate in Salah, because they do not change and do not fear God. My friend acts violently against those at peace with him. He violates his covenant with buttery words. His buttery words are smooth, but war is in his heart. His words are softer than oil, but they are drawn swords. Cast your burden on the Lord, and he will sustain you. He will never allow the righteous to be shaken. God, he will bring them down to the pit of destruction, men of bloodshed and treachery will not live out half their days, but I will trust in you. Let's pray. God, we ask as we come to what can be a very painful message. It ought to be a message that will bring release to us. We talk about betrayal, as we talk about brokenness. Lord, let us also talk about blessing. Let's talk about healing. And so we lift this up to you this morning. We just ask that you use this message to touch our hearts and begin to maybe heal some of the problems that we've had where people have hurt us, that we'd be able to let it go this morning. We lift this in your name. Amen. Now, it's obvious from the words that David has penned here that he is at what we would call an emotional code red. In fact, we would probably say that David was at maybe going through an acute anxiety attack. David is overwhelmed with stress. The title is Betrayed and Broken. David is going through a lot of pain right now. You see, David is still carrying an arrow that was shot into his heart from betrayal. He's betrayed by someone. You notice in verses 12 to 14, now I didn't isolate those verses, but look in your main text there, verses 12 to 14. Notice what he says as he describes what has happened to him. We don't know who this friend is, but we know the experience based on what he says here. He says, now it is not an enemy who insults me, otherwise I could bear it. It's not a foe who rises up against me, otherwise I could hide from him. But it is you, a man who is my peer, my companion, and good friend. We used to have close fellowship. We walked with the crowd into the house of God. You know, amazingly, when David wrote this, he was probably at the height of his power as king. There was great peace in the kingdom, great prosperity. He was living in the lap of luxury. Peace reigned everywhere. But a betrayal of a friend, a betrayal of somebody close to him, broke the heart of this mighty and successful king. It crushed this great man. You know, there's simply no greater human heartache in life, relationally speaking, than when someone you love and trust, someone you've opened your life up to, takes your legs out from under you and sucks the air right out of you through rejection or deception. Or when someone goes from having your back to sticking a knife in it, it is absolutely devastating. And David says it causes great heartache when somebody does that. David wrote a psalm describing betrayal, but he teaches us how to make sure that someone else's betrayal does not land us up in bitterness, and we do not allow pain to become a prison. So he's going to make sure that their betrayal does not create in us a bitterness, and that our pain doesn't lock us up in a prison because of what we're going through. So if you're one of those people, you're swimming in a hurt of heartache, and maybe you've got from your parents, maybe from your children, maybe from a spouse or a best friend at one time, and maybe you don't think you can ever get over it or get through it, take these steps that David is going to give us here in this very sad but very strong and powerful song. Notice, first of all, what he says we need to do. And as an example he gives us, he says, first of all, tell your hurt to God. Tell your hurt to God. Look at verses 1 and 2. He said, God, listen to my prayer, and do not hide from my plea for help. Pay attention to me and answer me. I am restless and in turmoil with my complaint. Now, David is at a point, he is so distraught because of what's happening. He can't even think straight. He can't think clearly. His thoughts trouble him. He can't get it out of his mind how he's hurt. And the more he thinks about it, the more he hurts over it. You know, we have an old saying, it's an old saying since I've been here, but we said, you know, when you've been hurt, don't nurse it, don't curse it, and don't rehearse it. Because when you're hurt, what is it that we tend to do? Well, we nurse it along. We actually help that hurt. We nurse it and increase it and help it to grow. We curse it. I can't believe this was done. We can't believe that person would do it. And then we rehearse it. We go over the things that were said. We replay it through our mind, and it goes over and over, and it swoops around in our mind. That's exactly what David is doing here. He can't get it out of his head. In fact, it shows how bad things are here. Look at verses 7 and 8. He says, how far away I would flee. I would stay in the wilderness, Selah. I would hurry to my shelter from the raging wind and storm. Selena's dad, David, last night asked me what Selah means. This was a psalm. And when you see the word Selah there, that was a break for the instruments to take on and to play. It's what we think. We don't know beyond that. We know it was a song, and so we think that was a break. So when you see that, there was time for music to play. But David is saying at this point, he says he would have willingly given up his throne, given up his kingdom, his power, his wealth, if he could just get away from the hurt that he's feeling. He said, I'd give up everything. I'd escape into the wilderness if I could get away from this. You know, if I could just get away from this hurt that I'm experiencing. Maybe, and I would say pretty much definite, you've all been it. At some point in your life, someone who was close to you has hurt you, maybe in the past, maybe you're going through it right now. Maybe you're experiencing that kind of pain where someone has broken your heart and you're going through right now. We just read here, the heartache here was someone that David called, it says, a good friend. Someone it says that he used to go to church with. He sat and worshiped with this person. This was a brother to him. This was somebody that he worshiped with. The pain for David, because of that, is absolutely unbearable. Hurt and heartache for him are absolutely crushing. Verses 4 and 5, he goes on to say, my heart shudders within me. Terrors of death sweep over me. Fear and trembling grip me. Horrors overwhelm me. Now think about the man who's writing this. This is a young man. As a young man, he stood before a 9-foot-tall giant with a sling and a stone, faced down the giant without any fear whatsoever, killed him in his steps. But that when that giant couldn't touch him, the betrayal of a friend could absolutely devastate him. He says it brings fear and distress into my heart. British preacher Charles Spurgeon once said, no one is such a real enemy as a false friend. And that's what David's experiencing. In the midst of his pain, David does the best and wisest thing that any of us could ever do. When we are deeply hurt, bitterly betrayed by someone, you notice what he says. Talk it out. Talk it out. Get it out. And the worst thing you can do is to harbor hurt, because a harbor hurt becomes bitterness. Melinda Stefanos last night was saying, she said, you know, it is like swallowing down acid, and it eats you down inside, doesn't it? When you swallow that hurt and it becomes bitterness inside, we've often said that bitterness and resentment were twin acids that eat your insides, and that's exactly what it does. That bitterness absolutely eats you up inside. You don't want to keep it there. You know, you think that you can't talk to anyone. You think there's nobody you can talk to. Maybe no one will understand what you're going through. You can always take that to God. You can always talk to Him rather than holding it down inside. You think nobody understands, God will understand. There's a great deal of truth in the saying that trouble shared is trouble had. You take it to God and that burden is lightened when you take it to Him. You should never harbor hurt or resentment or heartache down inside you. And I can assure you, not only does it not help anything, it actually makes things worse. It makes things harder on you when you do that. You see, there's so many reasons why we can go to God with heartache and pain and distress. There's some very good reasons. Number one is God is always available. You realize that? He's never too busy. You know, you go to talk to some people about something, they'll say, wait a minute, I've got some things going on, I'm a little busy. God doesn't say, wait a minute, I got 10 million people over here want something. Can you hang on just a minute? He's got all the time you need to listen to you. So He is always available if you want to come to Him. Plus, He understands. You can share things with other people and they may not understand it, but God is omniscient. He's all-knowing. He understands exactly what you're going through, and He relates to what you're going through. Also, He's totally trustworthy. You can trust Him to keep your confidence. You can trust Him to advise you rightly, and He, more than anyone else, can always help. There's also some other reasons. Number one, He never charges a fee. Counselors are expensive. God's free. You can go to Him anytime, and it's absolutely free. But most importantly, He always wants to hear your heart. He is, you know, God is never so busy that we can't talk to Him. We talked some time ago, and when I first came here, we talked about the idea of bringing it out. Remember that with the sponge? Y'all remember that? Hopefully you remember that. All right. And this was something, when I was first going into ministry, my pastor went through a rough time at our church. I've never seen a church put a man through what he went through. Death threats. He went through prank phone calls and things. All he did was work hard and love on people and do his best. But as the church grew and power structure began to shift, some people got bitter against him. And I mean, the majority of the church was for him, but what they put him through was awful. And so God eventually moved him to another church, I think, to protect his family. And so when I got ready to go into ministry, I had seen what he went through, and I said, no. I mean, last thing I ever want to do is pastor a church. I mean, I saw what that man went through. But when the call was overwhelming, I had to go down and I went down to counsel with him. And I said, Bill, if you could give me one piece of advice for a pastor, what would it be? And he said, never let bitterness be in your life. And I said, all right, can I tell you what you mean? He said, the pastor that advised him said, on Wednesday night, you may have someone say something you very hurt. He said, by Sunday morning, that has to be gone.
You have to have it completely cleaned out of your life. You need to be able to put your arm around them and intentionally and genuinely love that person without any resentment whatsoever. So he said, you've got to deal with whatever comes against you immediately. Get it out. Get rid of it. And so we've used this illustration here many times about a sponge, because pastors, we don't have a lot of people to go to that we can share stuff with, because you've got to keep things private. And I could overwhelm my wife in no time. If I shared with her everything that comes against me, it would overwhelm her. And I could call Buddy Wasson, now and then I could vent to Buddy Wasson, but I overwhelm Buddy Wasson, because he has 60 pastors coming to him. And so after a while, you realize the only person really you can go to that can take that away is to go to God. And so what I do is that's wringing out is you suck up so much and that sponge eventually gets full, it can't hold anymore. But you take that to God and you wring that out, and everything that's liquid in there gets wrung out, and what replaces it? Well, air replaces it. There's that void of the air. The Holy Spirit is referred to as like a wind or a breeze. You get that filling up with the Spirit, but now there's an emptiness there that can be filled up once again. And what you do is just on a regular basis, you take it to God and you wring it out to Him. Nobody else may be able to hear it. You may not be able to talk to anyone else, but you can most certainly talk to God. And you need to take it to Him. You are never bothering God. The only thing that bothers God is when you think that you bother God. He has all the time you want to talk to Him. He's got all that time. His shoulders are big enough to carry our hurts. His ears are sharp enough to hear our hurts. And His hands are strong enough to deal with our hurts. You need to take it to Him and let Him work on it. Tell your hurts to God. If you look at the Psalms, many of the Psalms, that's what they're written for. God, listen to me. God, hear me. God, this is what I'm going through. That is exactly what the Psalms are. Is somebody, whoever the writer was, whether it's David or someone else writing them, is pleading to God, listen to me. Please hear me. Ring it out to God. So let God have it. Second, tune your heart to God. Tune your heart to God. Somebody hurts you, betrays you, deceives you, stabs you in the back, jerks the rug out from under you, throws you under the bus, and leaves you holding the bag. Remember that your heart is like a tuning fork. And if you allow your heart to be tuned by that person and by that hurt that they did to you, by their betrayal, that betrayal will then tune your heart to become bitterness. You'll become bitter if you let that happen. At that point, you can choose to turn your heart to that person and to that hurt, or you can tune your heart to the God that loves you. It's your choice. You can tune it to one or the other. Listen to what David says in verses 16 through 19. He says, but I call to God, and the Lord will save me. I complain and groan morning, noon, and night, and He hears my voice. Though many are against me, He will redeem me from my battle unharmed. God, the one enthroned from long ago, will hear and will humiliate them, Selah, because they do not change and do not fear God. Now, he identifies some things about God, some things he believes about God here. He says, I'm taking it to God, I'm tuning into God for this reason. He says, God is a Savior, God is a listener, God is a Redeemer, and God is a ruler. Now, if God is a Savior, that means He can save you from anything that anyone does to you. If God is a listener, He's someone you can always talk to and He'll always listen to you. If He's a Redeemer, He can always overcome any negative consequences that may happen because of betrayal. And if He's a ruler, He can take anything that people intend bad for you and He can make it into something good for you. Romans 8:28. Wonderful verse we love to quote says, we know that all things work together for good to them that love God and are called according to His purpose. We have this promise that there is something that God will do with whatever we go through, and He'll turn it to good. David says in verse 17, he says, in tuning into God, he says, the morning he cried out, at noon he cried out, in the evening he cried out. He's tuning into God. What that means in the Hebrew was a way of saying was 24/7, I'm approaching God and I'm tuning into Him and I'm trying to connect to God 24/7. You can spend your time stewing about what others have done to you, or you can spend your time pursuing the God who can take care of you and take care of what you've gone through. If we're going to tune our hearts to who God is and what God can do, you've got to do it more than just once a day or once a week or once a month. We need to be doing it consistently and persistently. And I'll tell you why. Because when you think about the way God saves and He listens and redeems and rules over us, then God begins to deliver that poison of unforgiveness and that prison of bitterness. He begins to deliver us out of that, and we begin to resonate with the heart of God. We begin to tune in to Him. And when we are in tune with God, when we're in tune with God, we can forgive like God. It's when we're letting bitterness tune us in that we lose that ability to forgive. All that leads then to this third point. Trust your healing to God. David does something that we all need to do if we're going to come to grips with that hurt and heartache that someone near and dear to us has done to us. So often, what David does here is the exact opposite of what we tend to do. Now, when somebody hurts us, what do we tend to do? Well, we get on Facebook, and we begin to track them on Facebook, and then we'll get on Instagram or Twitter or something. We'll see if they're happy or if they're as hurt over what they did to us as we feel hurt. So we begin to track them. We begin to focus on them, how to raise them up into an uplifted position. Instead, what we need to do is look at them through the lens of God's eyes and realize God has revealed to us just what kind of person they really are. Look at verses 20 and 21, what he says here. My friend acts vilely against those at peace with him. He violates his covenant. His buttery words are smooth, but war is in his heart. His words are softer than oil, but they are drawn swords. You see his former friend as he really is, someone who is a backstabber, someone who's a gossip. David, he says, I'm not the one he's attacked. He's gone after other people. His reputation's out there. He's attacked other friends. And by the way, let me give you a little warning. If you hang around people who talk badly about other folks and gossip about other folks, they're going to talk about you too. You just need to understand that it's not just other people. Because that's their character. That's what he's saying. He realized his friend had made promises, didn't keep it. This was a man who would talk one way to one's face and another way behind his back. And Adrian Rogers used to say, flattery is what someone will say to your face, but they won't say behind your back. But real praise is what they'll say behind your back, but they may never say it to your face, but they'll compliment you behind your back. David has finally come to grips with the fact that this friend was never a true friend. His character is showing, and that realization of who that person is begins to heal him, begins to allow him to heal. He's not worth David's bitterness. David said, it's not worth me being upset over it, not worth me destroying myself over this person. David realizes it's time for him to leave behind that person who's left him behind. Listen, this is important. When you can't leave your past to God, you cannot enjoy the present, and you can't focus on the future. Nelson Mandela led a movement that eventually ended apartheid in South Africa. During his fight for equality, in 3 years' time, he was arrested for treason, put on trial for sabotage. He was sentenced to life in prison. He did hard labor. He slept on a hard floor in a cell with no toilet. He could only receive one visitor for 30 minutes, one time per year. That was the only visit he had. After he got out of prison, he spent several years under house arrest, making his total time of captivity 27 years. When he finally walked free in 1990, he said this, as I walked out the door toward the gate that would lead to my freedom, I knew if I didn't leave my bitterness and hatred behind, I would still and forever be in prison. And that's what David's realizing. He's got to let this guy go for who he is. He's got to release him. You may think you can never get over that mountain of hurt. You may think you can never get through that storm of heartache. But you can if you will simply say these words to God that David says. Notice what he says in verse 23. He says, in spite of everything he does, in spite of everything, but I will trust in you. He says, God, I'm going to put it all in your hands. I trust in you. You can take every hurt and every hurter, and you can trust God to heal the hurt, and you can trust him to deal with the hurt. God says, vengeance is mine. Let me have it. He does a much better job. Now, you need to let him have it, not because he's going to hurt them, but you need to be hoping that God changes the heart of that person who hurt you. That God will deal with that person in a way that is right. It's the only way you're ever going to be free from that prison of bitterness. And one last thing we need to do, tie your hope to God. Tie your hope to God. You know, I understand that betrayal feels like death, and in one sense it is, because many times when we've been betrayed, there is the death of a relationship, many times a close relationship. But that doesn't mean life is over. That doesn't mean you can't pick up and go on. There should come a time when you cut the cord that tied you to that relationship that didn't last, so you can tie your hope to a relationship that is never going to end. You look at verse 22. David says, cast your burden on the Lord, and he will sustain you. He will never allow the righteous to be shaken. You know what David is saying here is, look, people are going to fail you. All right? Every human being fails at some point. I fail. I disappoint people. Everyone in here fails at some point. The great thing is God never fails.
And that is a relationship that you can have that is solid and lasting. When you latch onto Him and connect to Him, He will never fail you. When you've been knocked flat, you're on your back by a blow you never saw coming, by someone you never thought would deliver, remember, because of that relationship with God, you can stand up again. David said, cast your burden on the Lord. He will sustain you. Now, it's natural to think that you can never get up again once you've been knocked down. Not only can you stand up, you can stay up. David goes on to say, He will never let the righteous be shaken. Because of the love of God and the hope we have in Him, you may get temporarily knocked down, but you are not out. You may be temporarily knocked down, but you're never permanently knocked out. It's a good quote that I found as I was looking at this. It said, hurt is the hallway to hope. You think about a hallway. Sometimes it's dark. Sometimes it's crowded. Sometimes it's a little dim in there. There's no windows. But at the end, there's a room filled with light, and that's exactly what that quote means, is that sometimes that hurt is a hallway that's going to lead to that hope. In the end, God can turn the sadness of betrayal into a song of blessing. You know, we'll give you an assignment. And I know if you've been hurt, this is a gut-wrenching message. It's hard. And it brings back sometimes the memories of pain and hurt and betrayal. But what you need to do is you need to begin to ask God to begin to drain that hurt and to fill your heart with hope. Begin to bring that out to Him, let Him have it. So I want to give you an assignment. And maybe you don't want to talk about this to anyone right now. But what I want you to do is go home and begin to deal with God with this. Go home and write down on a piece of paper, on a private letter to God, everything that you feel about what happened. The anger, the anguish, the bitterness, the burden, the pain, the perplexity. And when you finish with that, I want you to literally give that to God. Some people will take that paper and they'll tear it into little tiny pieces and throw it to the wind. Other people will take it and flush it down the toilet. If you've got a septic, you may not want to do that, but just say it. But some people will burn it. Burn that up. Some people put it in a helium balloon and send it, literally sending it back up to God. And let it have a symbolically. We used to use this as a counseling technique. Literally give that to God. Release it to Him. Give it to Him. I know the youth one time did an activity where they wrote things, hurts on a ball. They took it to the sea and they cast it into the sea with the idea of getting rid of it once and for all. Let Him have it. Leave everything with Him. Ask Him to heal your hurt and ask Him to deal with that person that hurt you. Ask God to change it. Ask God to change their hearts. Listen, I want to remind you, God understands your betrayal because it happened to Him twice in two different gardens. Garden of Eden, the dew was still wet on the grass of creation when the first two people He created stabbed in the back and betrayed Him. Garden of Gethsemane, the grass was wet from the blood drops of sweat from the brow of the Son of God who was going to go to the cross when one of His best friends betrayed Him. But out of both those betrayals came a Savior, a listener, a Redeemer, a ruler, who died on the cross, came back from the grave, so that He could take any betrayal that you've experienced and turn it into a blessing. Let's pray. God, we realize that as human beings, we do things sometimes that are painful and hurtful, and all of us at some point have been hurt by someone. And for some of us, that betrayal is just as fresh and as painful as the day that it happened. And we've lived in that bitterness and we've been unable to let it go. And God, it is like an acid deep within us and it eats us up. It doesn't hurt that other person, but it sure does tear us apart. So we ask, Father, that you would allow us today to take the advice of David, one who had experienced so much hurt throughout his life, but that we would take his advice and that we would turn these things over to you. We tell our hurt to you. We tune our hearts to you. Father, we ask that we would just be in sync with you as we deal with these things. David has given us so much good advice on dealing with it. You are always available and always ready to listen, and you want to heal us and get us beyond what we've gone through. You don't want us living in bitterness. You want us to be restored. Father, we ask that you would just allow us today to release that person, release that hurt, feel that sense of refreshment that comes from you, that we would experience not a betrayal, but a blessing. For it's in your name that we ask.